It was the 12th of April, 2013. I was working at a local branch of a national TV news organization. We were probably the third largest newsroom in West Virginia. At the time, I was mainly working as a news writer, but I helped with assignment editing for our reporters. Whenever we had something big come up, I got called up just after midnight. All hands on deck. Just from the way they talked to us and the urgency in their voices, I thought we were looking at another 9/11. I was fully expecting something vast and catastrophic. When I got to the station, I didn't know what to believe. The parking lot was packed, but I didn't see anything resembling police or FBI vehicles. I did recognize the symbols from both the USAC and EPA though. At this point, I thought we were looking at a natural disaster. I was ushered inside by a strange man in rough denim jeans, a flannel shirt, and some kind of Bluetooth headset. He was clearly supposed to look like a civilian, but everything about his demeanor screamed military. The determined eyes, the no questions asked kind of demeanor. There was no point in questioning him. These people were brick walls. The newsroom looked different in the dark. Everything does. The shadows were longer, and everything had a slight echo to it. Maybe the sounds just weren't soaked up as quickly by the background noise. There weren't enough chairs for everyone, so some people were sitting on the floor. I was in the back, leaning against the wall next to my fellow news writers, Ben and Erica, last names withheld. They were all a bit worked up and anxious, but Erica couldn't turn herself off. She was always working and always making mental notes. "Not everyone's here," she whispered. "What? We're missing people," she repeated. "We're missing a live camera crew." She was right. Peter usually did live camera coverage. He worked closely with Noel, who was also nowhere to be seen. Literally everyone but those two were there. Noel usually did night and early morning coverage, so I expected her to be front and center. They were working up in Juniper, Ben added. "Had a call from a local. Something happened up there." I asked. "Wildfire?" "No, nothing like that. No." Ben shook his head. "No idea what though. Something down in the valley." Erica shrugged. "We'd never seen anything like this." A woman in a pantsuit walked in and two men stepped up to block the exit. "We'd never seen any of these people before. We usually use this room for morning briefings, but without the murmur of people sipping their morning coffee, the room seemed more sinister." The pantsuit woman held several folders and kept talking to someone over her earpiece. Out of all people in the room, she seemed to be the one with the most answers. As to demand our attention, she slammed the folders down on the front desk, hard. The room fell silent. "There is a situation developing in Greenbrier Valley," the woman in the pantsuit said. "There has been a small earthquake. There are no casualties. In many ways, this is an insignificant event in and of itself. How your news team even heard about it is beyond our comprehension." Erica gave me a knowing smile. People around the valley loved Noel and her early morning segments. She had the most recurrent viewers by a large margin. If something happened around the valley, she'd know about it. "Since this is a matter of national interest, we've had to clamp down to control the spread of information," she continued. "We don't want to cause any unnecessary grievances. If it's such a small deal, why go to all this trouble?" One of our editors, Charlie, she never knew when to stay quiet. The woman in the pantsuit stopped, considered the question, and took a deep breath. I could tell she was stressed. "It is a developing situation. It might have some impact on the local wildlife, hence the presence of our friends at the USAC and the EPA. And what organization are you representing?" Charlie just couldn't stop herself from asking questions. The woman in the pantsuit might have tolerated a single interruption, but not two. One of the armed men covering the door walked up to Charlie, grabbed her by the arm, and lifted her to her feet. "I'm just asking who you're working with," Charlie scoffed. "Is that a problem? Is there a problem telling me who we're working with?" She refused to budge. The man tried to pull her away, but she twisted herself loose and stepped back. There was a murmur as we could see things escalate from frustration to potential confrontation. "Just tell us," Charlie continued. "Are you with DNR? Why aren't you answering my question?" The man with the flannel shirt caught up with her, and she put her hands up. With no resistance and no provocation, he pushed her down on one of the tables, face first. He pushed his elbow into her neck, causing her to heave and cough like she was being strangled. He put her in zip ties in a matter of seconds and dragged her out in a show of force. Now everyone was off the floor. The crew tried to talk over one another in this storm of complaints and questions. One of the camera operators tried to get out and had a gun pulled on him. Things were escalating fast, and it only stopped when the woman in the pantsuit slammed down her folders again. For a split second, I thought it was a gunshot. If we start working together, y'all might just have a career left by the end of the night. Since cooperation doesn't seem to be a given at this point, we must take some precautions. They took our phones away and patted us down to make sure we didn't have anything hidden. The woman in the pantsuit laid out a bunch of documents for us to sign. We didn't get the time to read them, just a pen to sign them with and a promise of pain if we refused. Once it was said and done, she left. I never saw her again. Over the next hour, they brought in more people. 2 more cars of armed guards dressed in civilian outfits. Once they took us out of the meeting room, we were divided into 3 different teams. Marcus, our news director, was completely sidelined. Quarantined, sort of. There was no clear organizational structure. It was all ordered remotely. We could hear the various agents receive instructions from an off-site central command. Something down in Greenbrier Valley, we suspected. A man arrived just past 2 in the morning. He was in his early 70s and dressed in a cheap navy blue suit, but I could tell he was the one to keep my eyes on. The other agents seemed to pay special attention to him. He had this goofy little sunflower pin on his collar, something old and corporate. We were dragged back into the meeting room. As the guards started handing out folders, we got 3 possible developments. The old man said, all equally possible, and we need to be prepared for each of them. There will be more people coming in through the night, and you'll be expected to stay here for the next 16 hours, minimum. There were no questions. We hadn't seen Charlie since she was carried off. They'd talked to Marcus about it, and ever since, he'd been quiet. This was a man who was usually standing at the front of the room barking orders and taking charge. Now he looked like a beaten puppy. Those of you with green folders are to stay right here. The old man continued. Blue folders need to go with the gentleman by the door. Red folders, you're coming with me. All news writers got differently colored folders. I got a red folder. It was ominous, to say the least. We were taken into one of the back rooms, along with an armed contingency. There was a seal on the folder, and I didn't want to take a chance on breaking it. A reporter, a video editor, an assignment editor, 3 people from the production crew, and one of the anchors. I can't tell you the name, but you'd recognize him if you lived in West Virginia. In the 2010s, they all sat down around a small table. The old man followed us there, reminding us about the NDA we'd been forced to sign. Once we were all behind closed doors, he had the guards wait for him outside. For a moment, it was just the old man and us. I need your absolute discretion on this topic, he said. You can look over your briefing. We broke the seals and went through our folders, page after page of details, pictures, graphs, and statistics. Mine was about diamondback rattlesnakes, how there was an aggressive and invasive brood, and how people were supposed to stay away from the lakes near Greenbrier Valley because of them. Something about an urgent call for people to stay out of various underground caves, and to not be alarmed by the presence of wildlife specialists in the area. It all seemed hastily prepared. One of the editors raised his hand, and the old man allowed him to speak. This doesn't make any sense, said the editor. You know there are no diamondbacks like that around here, right? Doesn't matter, you're gonna have to report it. No, I mean, this is a lie. It is fiction. These are native to, like, Georgia. Doesn't matter what it is and what it isn't. You're reporting it. But I'm telling you, people will notice. They'll believe whatever we goddamn tell them to believe. The old man slammed his hand down, hard. We all recoiled as one of the guards opened the door. He was waved aside, and the door promptly closed. As tempers cooled, the old man stepped outside to have a smoke. The rest of us were left to discuss on our own for a while. We compared notes, and we weren't thrilled about the implications. This was clearly a worst-case scenario kind of folder, and while the whole story about enraged rattlesnakes were fiction, it still highlighted something. If this scenario took place, there'd be armed guards surrounding a massive area. They spoke of a possible controlled burning of the undergrowth and closing several large roads. About 3 dozen homes would have to be evacuated, minimum. But it wasn't even about what they were saying, it was about what they weren't saying. This was clearly not about rattlesnakes, so what the hell were they afraid of? Whatever it was bad enough for them to threaten to burn down several acres of forest in the Lewisburg area. Then I saw the eyes of our news anchor go wild. "There are time stamps," he said. "This one is in 4 hours." To put that whole plan into action with such short notice, they had to already have put things into motion. When the old man returned, we were again separated and told to start working on the news segment. I was to write it up and summarize it using the provided information and quotes to make it cohesive. There were some pictures and videos handed to our video editor. Our news anchor was told to perform a mock interview with a supposed snake expert who could explain the situation. It was actually just one of the guards sitting in the adjacent room with a walkie-talkie. We were gonna pre-tape it all so that the segment could be played if a sudden evacuation was necessary. I found it strange, considering our station was nowhere near the area that officially needed to be evacuated. According to their own fictional scenario, there was something else brewing. I managed to catch a glimpse of Erica and we exchanged a look across the hall. I asked one of the armed guards if I could use the restroom. He didn't seem to mind but told me he'd check on me in a few minutes. I excused myself. I met Erica in the bathroom. I could tell she was flustered. She kept washing her hands, as if trying to keep herself occupied. "What'd you get?" I whispered. "What they tell you. They say they're hunting an escaped convict, armed and dangerous. Phew, rattlesnakes. Diamondback rattlesnakes." "What?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Rattlesnakes." We compared notes. The stories provided were completely different, but they had something in common: evacuation of an area and the presence of armed guards. Both could also be a future explanation for possible civilian injuries. What changed was the scale. Erica's story was much smaller in scope and somewhat more believable. Mine would have the same effect, but to a much larger area. Also, her story didn't involve setting fire to parts of the valley. It did mention locking doors though, and not picking up hitchhikers. Erica was dumbfounded. She walked back and forth, scratching her head. "What the hell is this? What aren't they telling us? This is not the time to ask questions. We gotta stay low on this." "But this is BS, she wheezed. "What the hell are we gonna lie about next? Bigfoot, the chupacabra, the red piper birds, that trick kids into the woods? I don't know, but it doesn't matter. We can't do anything right now." Erica didn't like it, but she knew I was right. And to be fair, that red piper bird story has some merit to it. I know a guy. Our time was up, and we were moved to different rooms. I was plopped down in front of a laptop, with a guard supervising my actions. They'd pulled our Wi-Fi, but I started sketching up a segment about the supposed Diamondback outbreak. Every paragraph was reviewed, and there was no revision. Everything was immediately sent to the studio, or sent back with a list of notes. There were protests from the crew, but they were quickly silenced. The video editors had little to nothing to work with, and without Noel and Peter, we knew people would start to ask questions. You can't just have an early morning segment without them about something so outlandish. Not only were we lying, we were forced to do it badly. It's just a precaution, we were told. That's all there's to it. A precaution. It probably won't air. People were running all over the place, some of them screaming at each other in the corridors. Someone was crying in the bathroom, and a guy from the production crew passed out from the stress. He looked like a ventriloquist dummy, sitting with his eyes half open as he slumped over in the corner. One of our assistants were trying to explain something to a guard, and got a right hook straight to the jaw in response. Things were getting out of hand, quickly, and I was under intense pressure to finish my writing. At one point, we were all pulled out of our chairs, and pushed up against the wall. When people started protesting, we were all told to be quiet, and for a few minutes, you could hear a pin drop. And somewhere in the distance, a helicopter. The guards started buzzing about. They talked about preparing for something. They brought out a kind of plastic paneling and duct tape from one of their trucks and forced one of the writing teams out of a meeting room on the bottom floor. The helicopter was coming our way. I heard screams about emergency landing as people scrambled to prepare something downstairs. I could see a little from a window on the top floor. I couldn't see where the helicopter landed, but the sound it made was deafening. Even from inside the building, I had to cover my ears. I could see camouflaged soldiers bringing someone inside, someone screaming at the top of their lungs. A woman, I think. "Boil water," someone screamed. "We need to boil water. Towels." "We need more towels," yelled another. There was intense debate. Even now, the news anchor was told to keep recording. The old man was debating something over his earpiece. I couldn't quite make it out, but I heard some colors mentioned. It seemed that the red folder would be the most likely outcome. Then at some point, it sounded like the red folder wouldn't be enough. They were already talking extensions and further contingencies. At one point, while the initial parts of the segments were exported for review, the old man pulled me aside. I was taken downstairs, closer to the screaming, and put in a small side room. "I'm gonna be honest with you, miss," he said as we shuffled down the stairs. "We might have to go off script on this one." There were no more physical folders to distribute, but they called this theoretical contingency the violet folder. It was just me and Ben working on it, seeing as the first folder had been completely abandoned, and we needed a new solid concept. The mildest scenario was no longer plausible, it seemed. The old man sat us down and complained that we needed something to explain a whole new set of events. We're talking, maybe, 6 or 7 miles increased radius in each direction, complete water shutdown for all of Lewisburg for at least 36 hours, semi-controlled fire at an unprecedented scale, intermittent power outages, waves of ground shocks that can cause everything from traffic disruption to bursting gas and sewage pipes. Where do we start?" asked Ben. The old man threw up his arms in defeat. He looked 10 years older. "I don't know," he admitted. "I can't. It has to make sense. So just tell them the truth. Tell us the truth," I pleaded. "We can help." For a moment, I could see he was considering it. He was nodding, looking down, and searched for the right words. Then something changed. He held a finger up to his earpiece, and his eyes shifted. Someone was talking. Suddenly, he shot out of his chair. "You're not bringing them here," he told someone on the other end of the line. "We have civilians, you can't know." And with that, he ran out of the room. Ben and I just sat there for a while. I tried to imagine what could be happening out there to cause this kind of response. I thought back on what the woman in the pantsuit had said. This is a situation developing in the Greenbrier Valley. That's a huge area. Was it that she'd just been unspecific? Or was this something that really encompassed the entire valley? Considering I was working on the violet folder, I was starting to consider the latter. I don't know what to do," Ben admitted. "There's, nothing like this that I've worked on. I mean, none of us have," I added. "Water, power, plumbing." "Did he say earthquakes?" "Earth shocks," nodded Ben. "Not earthquakes, but a series of aftershocks." "How do those come about? What the hell do we say? I'm not a geologist." Ben smiled. "Maybe blame the Democrats." I chuckled. Ben always knew exactly the best wrong thing to say. The helicopter was leaving, but something was happening outside. People were going quiet in the hallways. From the safety of our little room, we could hear them bringing something in, something being rolled on squeaky wheels. Ben was about to peek out, but I pulled him back. We weren't getting involved. Not on my watch. The screaming woman had gone quiet. Maybe she'd passed out. I could hear something banging on metal. A gargle, followed by a snake-like hiss. Squeaking wheels kept turning as something was slowly being pushed through the building. Then another banging sound, followed by a snap. Everything fell deathly quiet. A second later, chaos. Gunshots, screams, screeching metal, wood breaking, glass shattering, automatic gunfire. Hundreds of rounds sprayed in all directions. As the gunfire died down, I could hear people running, scrambling for safety, doors being slammed shut with desperate voices calling out for barricades and ammunition. "There are still people out there." A muffled voice came through. "Get them out of there." And then, a completely alien noise. The best way I can describe it is a rattled breath. The same kind of rattle you hear when a big wasp struggles against a glass window, but bigger and organic. It was rhythmic, like someone taking deep, wounded breaths. Then there was clicking, sharp, dolphin-like clicking. It bounced against the walls, forcing an echo. It was such a sharp sound that it tickled my inner ear, making my head spin. I heard footsteps, several pairs, multiple individuals, and they were coming our way. Our room was just a little meeting room, a table with a set of laptops, 5 office chairs, 2 fake plants, and a gray carpet. That was it. But I got the feeling that if whatever was out there made its way in here, we'd be in trouble. This had to be the answer to whatever was happening down in the valley. And whatever it was, that sound was going to haunt my nightmares. I pointed at the light switch, but Ben didn't get the hint. I tried waving my hand around, and that seemed to do the trick. He snapped back to reality, killed the light, and we both crawled under the table. Moments later, something wet slapped against the door. Ben covered his mouth to stifle a scream. I could still hear his whimper. Another slap against the door, this one higher up. I could hear another set of footprints further off, counting at least 3 individuals in total. Then, creaking metal, the handle was turning. Ben couldn't shut up. He was on the cusp of hyperventilation, and it seemed to just be a matter of time. "You gotta stop, Ben," I whispered. "You gotta stop. Just stop." I can't just." It got worse. I put my hand over his mouth, forcing it shut. I could feel his hot breath on my fingers. The door handle turned as something wet slapped its way into the room, only slightly muffled by the carpet. More clicking, more rattled exhales, something viscous and warm dropping onto the floor in chunks. I could feel Ben's breathing growing more and more irregular, faster. Something slammed down on the table above us. Ben couldn't help it. He yelped. For a moment, everything was silent. Every room, every guard, every vehicle outside. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until my face started feeling warm. Then, one of the office chairs was flung across the room, hissing, angry, animalistic hissing. And suddenly, Ben shuddered. "It's standing on my foot," he breathed. It's standing on my." Ben grabbed a hold of me, clinging to me, and in the next breath, he was pulled out from under the table. He wasn't even screaming anymore, just wailing like a frightened child struggling to understand his lungs. I heard something heavy come down on him, over and over, like a primate trying to crush a watermelon. Temporary lapses in his breathing, as his ribs were crushed. Something snapping as his arm was twisted out of its socket. Drops of something warm spattering, hitting me across the face and the right side of my arm. I could have stayed. I could have hoped that they'd move on. And yet, something in the back of my mind was telling me to run. So I did. Even in the dark, I knew this place by heart. I scrambled out from under the table, burst through the door, and headed straight for the exit. A dozen voices screamed at me from a dozen directions. "Go, go, go. Come on. This way. Don't look back. Stay low. Stay low." Something was panting, trying to catch up. Something wet. I could feel it brush against the back of my head, pulling away a handful of strands of hair. The front doors opened as the man in the flannel shirt pulled me out. Gunfire echoed as whatever had been behind me retreated into the dark. I only caught a glimpse of them. Slick, oil black skin, eyes like a shark, deep and unfeeling, rows of syringe-like teeth, roughly humanoid, but only by shape. Someone yelled out that they got one. Emboldened, doors started to open. More gunfire, screams, and flashes of light. Yet all I could concentrate on was the deep dark blood covering my hands, still dripping from my face. After that, things went fast. I was pulled out and examined. They went for the segment about the escaped convict, claiming at least one known victim. Then, they kept the story small and local. If you lived in the area back in 2013, it is possible you might have caught it on the morning and afternoon news on April 12th. A short mention of it on the 13th. We were under strict control, and they weren't kidding around when it came to threats. They made it very clear that a single word about this would not only jeopardize our career, but our very lives. It's been 10 years. I've changed a few locations, a few names, and a few details, but the gist of it is right there. Maybe they're still checking in on us from time to time to see if we're behaving. I don't think they are. I'm making this as a sort of witness to what really happened that day. There was no escaped convict, no knife attacks, but people died that day, and I still haven't got the faintest clue as to why. And we can't even ask questions, or they'll make us pay. But I won't forget. I can't, and you'll never find me anywhere near West Virginia again. Studying abroad alone could be tough, even without considering the difficulty of the course itself. My study in the US has been quite challenging, especially in the financial aspect. Everything here was so expensive compared to back home. I felt upset every time I did my monthly budgeting. Housing, food, tuition, and transportation, they all added up to a frightening amount. So, I started taking a part-time job. It was a medium-sized Thai restaurant just about 15 minutes from my dormitory. All the employees, They were all Thai, and they immediately hired me as a waitress for a simple reason: being able to speak both Thai and English decently. Although I was the youngest there, I fit in easily, and everyone welcomed me as the little sister of the team. It was one of those rare occurrences where when the management claimed that they worked together like a family, they really meant it. The loneliness of being in a vastly different cultural environment bonded us, and we always looked out for one another. Overall, it was a really good workplace. The pay was not bad, and I also got paid extra with some free time meal every shift. The food was far from authentic, but the part where we crowded into the kitchen and chit-chatted over a hot meal together before the shift started was what I looked forward to the most each day. It was a little wholesome moment that reminded me of my family back home. There was one extra task that I needed to do each day before the meal, though. On the far corner of the restaurant was an old wooden shelf holding a small doll of a boy wearing a traditional Thai costume. This deity was called Kumanthon. The word Kumanthon meant a golden boy. The practice of adopting Kumanthon was a very old belief dating back hundreds of years, and somehow it still survived until today. Ask any Thai person you know about this, and you might hear an interesting anecdote. Kumanthon's origin was quite morbid, as expected. In the past, dead fetuses of children who died while still in their mother's womb were roasted and dried by a practitioner of black magic to create a Kumanthon. Through a specific ritual, the spirit of the stillborn babies would be invoked to possess these dried corpses. The owner could then adopt them and worship them, feeding them food like a real child. Obviously, you couldn't use stillborns to create Kumanthon now, so people opted to use dolls instead. Still creepy, but it definitely resulted in less grave robbing if I had to guess. People believed that the Kumanthon would bring luck and prosperity to any household that took good care of it. My grandmother also adopted one at her home in Bangkok. She had always had it ever since she moved there 60 years ago. One of the stories she would tell me all the time when I was young was about the one time she forgot to turn off the stove before going to bed. She told me that she had a bizarre dream at night where she saw a small child dressed in traditional Thai outfit running in her house, giggling like he was trying to show her something. She felt like someone was pulling her leg, then woke up to the smell of a burning kitchen. Luckily, she was able to put out the fire very quickly, and until today, she still believed that the Kumanthon came to warn her about the fire in her dream. Noi, the owner of the restaurant, must have held the same strong belief as my grandmother. I had never met her, but our manager told us that she was quite superstitious. Apparently, she came to the US with almost nothing, but somehow managed to buy the restaurant at a very favorable price. Not only that, a famous food blogger came in a few years ago and left a good review, resulting in the business picking up very quickly. Moi credited all these lucky events to the power of the Kumanthon. Therefore, it was crucial for her that we treated the Kumanthon with utmost respect. We had to treat it like a real child. I was never the person who would believe in these supernatural deities, but in Thai, we had a phrase saying, if you don't believe in it, don't disrespect it. That phrase was something I lived by all my life. So when the manager asked me to take a small plate of food to the Kumanthon, I complied. Kumanthon, the dinner is ready. Please enjoy, I murmured to the doll as I placed the tray of food and a glass of red Fanta on the shrine. Yes, red Fanta, as absurd as it may sound. Kumanthon's choice of drink was apparently strawberry soda. People used to offer the Kumanthon blood in the past, but not anymore. It was a common agreement that since the red Fanta and blood were both red, they should be an acceptable substitute. It was just a normal day for me. I completed my daily ritual of offering food to the Kumanthon and went about my day, getting ready for the restaurant to open at 6. It had been raining all afternoon, without a sign of stopping, so I expected it to be one of those slower days. About 15 minutes to 6, the first customer showed up. They were a family of 3 consisting of a father in his late 30s, a tired-looking mother, and a young son dangling in her arms. The child was about 3 or 4, which was the worst age to be out in a public place. Most of the time, they were not old enough to learn to behave properly in public, but they were not young enough to be confined to the child's seat for the entirety of the meal either. I glanced at my manager, Namwin, who returned me a look that said, "Go deal with them, please." "Good evening, sir. I'm afraid we won't be opening until 6, I said politely. "We understand. but can we just wait here? I have a reservation at 600 gym. We plan to go to the park before coming here, but you know, the father gestured to the pouring rain outside, so we are a little early. Of course, I led him and his family to the reserved table, right under the Kumanthong shrine. We'll let you know when we're ready to take your order. Would you like some drinks meanwhile? Yes, just water, the father said. Daddy, can I have a Coke? The boy asked, as his mother placed him on a chair. Fine, water and a can of Coke then. The father gave in. The kitchen was already busy even though no order had come in yet. The chef was thawing the meat and cutting vegetables, while the kitchen hands were busy preparing spring rolls fillings. I squeezed past them to the fridge where we kept all soft drinks. There were some iced tea and lemonade soda, but no Coke. Are we out of Coke, Namwin? I asked the restaurant's manager, who was wrapping spring rolls nearby. I told you to refill it last night, didn't I, Lek? Namwin shouted at one of the kitchen hands. Sis, I'm so sorry, but I forgot. He shouted back. This guy. Namwin sighed deeply, and then turned to me. Can you please go buy some from the grocery store near the bus stop? Just take the money from the cash register. I didn't want to go outside in this weather, but someone had to do it, and it was better if I did it before more customers arrived. Since everyone else was busy, I decided to take one for the team. I grabbed the umbrella and started walking. The store was just 2 blocks away, but it took me almost 20 minutes to return. I bought 2 packs, which turned out to be heavier than I had anticipated, especially while trying to balance them with one hand while holding the umbrella with the other. Despite my best efforts, my apron was soaked and I couldn't stop trembling. This chilly weather was something a person from a tropical country like me could never get used to. By the time I came back, the restaurant had become much more packed. A big family arrived without a reservation, and Namwon was busy rearranging tables and chairs to accommodate them. I quickly changed my apron, grabbed a can of Coke, and walked over to the first family. The mother and father were engrossed in a conversation about politics and weren't paying attention to their son. The boy had climbed onto his chair to the Kumanthong shrine, and to my horror, he was drinking from the glass of red Phantom Mint as an offering. Noi would be furious if she saw that. Oh no, I'm so sorry, but please don't drink from that. I tried to stop the boy, but I hesitated to touch other people's children without permission. The father eventually broke away from his conversation and looked at his son with an annoyed expression. Jacob, get down from there, he commanded. But I am thirsty, the boy whined. Where's my Coke? It's right here. I'm sorry it took a while, I apologized. I took their order, but before I left, I decided to remove the food tray from the Kumanthong shrine as well. Less than half of the soda remained in the glass. Jacob had also eaten the small fish cake and rice that were offered to the Kumanthong. Although I didn't believe in the Kumanthong, I still thought it was quite disrespectful for his parents to let him do that. I brought the tray back to the kitchen. The kid at table 14 ate the offering. I told my manager, should I refill them? What kind of parents let their child eat from a random shelf? Namwon complained as she handed the long list of orders to the chef. Yeah, we should refill that. But first, we need 12 extra champagne glasses for table 2. There are some in the dishwasher, but probably not enough. I'll look for some more in the storage room. More customers kept coming in, and I was so busy I forgot to refill the offering. An hour or so passed, and I was helping a customer with his receipt when Jacob's mother approached me at the counter with a hysterical expression on her face. My son is missing, she screamed. Two took him to the bathroom, and I got distracted from a call. He didn't come out, so I went in to check, but he wasn't there. This was definitely something above my pay grade. I called Namwon over, and she consoled the panicking mother while sending some of us to look for the boy around the restaurant area. I was sent out to the balcony. The rain had not stopped, and the wind was blowing cold droplets of rain into my face. I started shivering almost immediately. Our restaurant was on the second floor of a 4-story building. The storage room and the bathroom were only accessible through the long balcony outside. A flight of stairs led down from the balcony to the parking lot. I saw Jacob's father walking around in the rain, calling out to his son. His yelling was swallowed by the sound of the heavy rain. There were many cars parked there, but there was no sign of any other human. I went into the bathroom just to be sure. Obviously, it was empty. Of According to Jacob's mother, she was waiting for him in front of the bathroom, so there was no way she wouldn't have seen him leaving. Jacob might be able to fit into the small window if he tried, but I doubted he could reach it. As I was about to leave, I heard a faint giggle. "Jacob, come on out. Your parents are looking for you," I said, turning around. Nobody was there. I must have confused the sound of the rain for a child's giggle. At the storage room, it was harder to tell if someone was there at the first glance. We didn't clean it as often as we should, so it was all dusty and full of junk. Employees' lockers were located on one side, several boxes of unopened dry ingredients on the other. Broken chairs and tables were stacked near the corner of the room, with cleaning supplies scattered all over. There was only a single light bulb in there, and it was not very bright. At first glance, there was no one there. Then I heard it again. It was the sound of a child laughing, and this time, I was sure of it. The giggling sound was soft and belonged to a boy around Jacob's age. I was very spooked by this point. "Jacob, are you there?" "He's not here, just me," a boy's voice replied, and I froze. He replied to me in Thai. Suddenly, my eyes caught a movement in the dark corner of the room. I believed I saw a small head covered with black hair and a traditional Thai top knot moving into the shadow and disappearing. Remembering how Jacob was blonde, I screamed and slammed the door closed, hitting my back against the balcony's railing as I backpedaled the hell out of there. When I returned to the restaurant, Jacob's father was back from his futile search. He was soaked wet and defeated. Jacob's mother was crying hysterically. The police arrived shortly after that. From their whispers, it seemed they were considering Jacob's disappearance as a kidnapping case. I gulped and turned to Namwin, who was biting her nails anxiously. "Namwin, did any one of us bring a child here?" I asked. "What are you talking about?" Namwin asked. "None of us have any kids, and even if we do, Noi would never allow us to bring them here." "I see," I murmured. "Did you see something, Fa?" she asked, suddenly becoming attentive. "You should tell the police if you saw anything strange." "I don't know if I saw what I think I saw." I glanced at the cumin thong doll on the shelf. Namwin followed my gaze and gasped quietly. She then disappeared into the kitchen and came out with a refilled glass of red Fanta and a plate of food. The police watched in confusion as Namwin brought the plate to the cumin thong shrine, but she didn't seem to care. She pressed her hands together and started to pray in silence. As I watched her, I also called out to the cumin thong in my mind and asked him to help find the missing child. Not even 10 minutes had passed when one of the policemen ran into the restaurant. We found him. We could not believe our eyes as another policeman walked in with Jacob cuddled in his arms. I didn't get a good look at him because he was quickly carried away to the ambulance, with his parents rushing behind. They all had a big collective sigh of relief, but then the policemen started to look very serious. We found him in one of the bathroom stalls. Apparently, he never left. The policeman said, "You guys did check the bathroom, right?" "Countless times," Namwin insisted. Both his parents went in to look for him. Almost all of our employees went in. Even one of you guys went in when you first arrived. Remember, this is really strange. The policeman scratched his head. How did none of us see him during the 2 hours he was missing? He must have been playing with cumin thong. Perhaps the cumin thong didn't want his playtime to be over yet. One of the kitchen hands murmured. Namwin turned to glare at him. After all, she didn't want them to think we were a bunch of superstitious crazy people. Although it was still unexplainable at the time, the police accepted their win and left. My life resumed its normal routine. We never saw Jacob's family again, which was understandable. I wouldn't want to come back either if I were them. I still thought about them and the weird encounter in the storage room from time to time, and I brought it up with Namwin one day. Actually, a policeman dropped by a week after that. Namwin said, "You weren't here since it was not your shift." He came to ask if we had seen any suspicious individuals. That day, they suspected that something emotionally traumatic happened to that kid. "Why did they think so?" I asked. "Because the boy wouldn't speak to anyone after the whole ordeal. His parents said it was like he was a different person. When he finally talked, he spoke in a language they didn't understand. His diet also changed. He wouldn't eat anything except pig blood curd." They were pretty spooked and concerned, it seemed. Namwin handed me the tray. "Anyway, take this to the cumin thong, will you?" I looked at the tray. The glass was filled with Coke this time, and the food offering was not Thai food, but a small portion of mac and cheese, and 2 pieces of chicken nuggets. Mac and cheese. Namwan shrugged nervously. Well, I just think that maybe he might prefer this. We never heard from Jacob's family again. Moi still refused to move the shrine from its original place. Therefore, we just tried to avoid seating families with young children near the Kumanthong shrine nowadays. If you're reading this, please make sure to remind your children to behave when out in public, especially when you visit a Thai restaurant. Otherwise, the child you take back home might not really be yours. I am a park ranger out in Nevada. There was an old, abandoned mining town that sat a ways off the main road. The Park Service had claimed it a while back, but people were not encouraged to visit there. In fact, it was plainly marked with signs that said, off limits, no trespassing, danger. Hell, about the only thing they didn't do was build a moat around the place. Sometimes I wonder if they should. Some people need to learn to read or listen, one of the two, because it seemed like I was always chasing people out of there. They'd look at me like I was crazy, but every one of them would spray gravel as they hauled ass after I'd tell them the story. I'm not supposed to tell the story. I've been warned many times, even threatened with much worse than the unemployment line. I guess maybe I need to learn how to listen too, but it was the best way to make sure people left and never came back. I'm tired of being told to keep my mouth shut. I'm tired that nothing's been done about it. We rangers are supposed to just go about our jobs and pretend it never happened. Well, I believe that's the best and quickest way for it to happen again, and I never want it to happen again. It was a while ago. That's my way of saying I forget how long ago it was, but the memory's still fresh enough to tell. It was back when even I was unsure why the town was off limits. I'd heard old wives' tales and urban legends, but no one would ever commit to anything concrete. I asked around once and was told that I was better off not knowing. The old rangers would just tell me to mind my business and stay out of town, but something about it always intrigued me. I was never good at blindly following orders, so as often as I could, I'd find some excuse to drive past it. On that day, it was a good thing I did, or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. I noticed a small mobile home parked at the edge of the town. I knew it hadn't been there the day before. I pulled up behind it and got out of my truck. I scanned the area around and didn't see anything moving that the wind wasn't blowing. I walked around the vehicle and it seemed to be in good shape. None of the tires were flat. There seemed to be no good reason for them sitting there unless they were sightseeing. I peeked in the windshield, but couldn't see anyone, so I went to the side door and knocked. "Park ranger," I said. "Anybody in there?" The wind whistling was my only answer. I knocked again. "Park ranger, is everyone all right?" No answer. I pulled on the door latch and it opened. "I'm coming in," I said. "Just need to check to make sure everyone's okay." I pulled the door open and stepped inside. Unconsciously, I rested my hand on my sidearm. I closed the door behind me, leaving the wind outside. I looked around the camper and found plenty of food and supplies. They seemed to be well stocked for a trip. I stepped back toward the bedroom, keeping an ear open for anything. It was eerily silent. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my boots on the linoleum as I headed back the short hallway. It wasn't a long walk until I got there. The bedroom was clean and the bed had been made. I opened a few drawers and found clothes for a man and a woman. There was no sign of a struggle, so I went back out to the kitchen, stopping to open the bathroom door and find 2 kids' toothbrushes and toothpaste sitting on the sink. Just like the bedroom, everything seemed to be in its place. I noticed the hand towel holder was empty. I looked on the floor to see if it had fallen, but the towel was just gone. I shrugged it off and went back out to the kitchen. The table was still folded down into a bed, as these smaller models were known for. Scanning around, I was hard-pressed to find anything out of the ordinary, except for the fact that no one was there. I stepped outside, and the sun had disappeared. It would be dark soon. I looked around but didn't see anyone. It was as if they parked the camper at the edge of town and went for a walk. I stepped out of the camper and turned to close the door. That was when I saw it. There was a small dot of red on the step. I leaned closer, and it looked like it could be dried blood. I tried to dismiss it as nothing. People drip blood every day for simple, non-threatening reasons. Nosebleeds, small cuts, general accidents, it could be absolutely nothing. But when you add in a missing family at the edge of an abandoned town that's supposed to be off limits, normal things don't look so normal. I didn't touch it in case it needed to be tested later for a DNA sample. And there it was. I was already starting to look at this as a crime scene. I looked down at the ground and saw my boot prints in the dirt leading up to the camper. I also saw other tracks. There was another set of adult boot prints, a set of adult sneakers, and 2 different sets of smaller sneakers. Those were spooky, but comforting. At least I knew these people were here somewhere. They hadn't just vanished from inside the camper. No, it was the other footprints that gave me chills. They were adult-sized, and it looked like there was more than one of them, but the creepy thing about them was they were bare feet. I couldn't imagine anyone who lived in the area being stupid enough to walk around the desert in their bare feet. Aside from the different types of scorpions, there were also snakes, spiders, and lizards, just to name a few. It was becoming more likely that I would find this family dead from stupidity. I followed the barefoot tracks, and they seemed to lead around the corner of the camper. In fact, they did several laps around the camper, with frequent stops where the feet were pointed toward the camper as if looking inside. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. This family had been stalked. I stepped in a wider circle so I wouldn't disturb the footprints. It became more apparent by the minute that this was a crime scene. I pulled out my radio to call in my position and request backup or police, but my radio was strangely silent. It didn't even click when I released the talk button. The light was lit, so I knew the battery was charged. It just wasn't transmitting. The smart thing to do just then would have been to get in my truck and drive to the station to report what was happening. I took one step toward the truck. That's when I heard the scream. It was a woman's scream, high and piercing. It was a scream of pain and anguish, as if her whole world had come crashing down. My fight or flight kicked in, and there wasn't an ounce of flight in it. In a heartbeat, my gun was in my hand. I turned toward the town and began following the footprints. Once they were done circling the camper, they headed straight into town. Dusk had faded and taken the light with it. I pulled my flashlight off my belt and used it to guide me on my trail. There were a half-dozen buildings, all in some level of decay. I was worried about stepping into one and it just collapsing on top of me. That aside from the chance of meeting a scorpion or some other creature that didn't appreciate being disturbed in their territory. The wind had died down, and the air was still. It was so quiet, I could hear my own footsteps. There was something else too. I felt a vibration in the air. At the time I thought it was just my heightened senses, at the prospect of meeting up with the dangerous person who may have harmed that family. Even though everything within me was demanding I run towards the scream I'd heard, my steps were slow and measured. I needed more input. I needed to know how many people I was dealing with. I needed to identify threats, and if I would be able to deal with this without becoming a victim myself. As I approached the first building, I had a strong feeling of being watched. Stepping on the porch made the boards creak threateningly. I didn't want this to end with a broken ankle, or worse. I tested the boards before putting full weight on them, and slowly approached the broken windows. I shone my light inside. I panned around slowly, finding a bunch of old boxes and general junk with the odd wooden chair and table. I was about to move on when back in the far corner I saw a pair of eyes lit by my flashlight. I froze, my light locked on it. The eyes seemed to be locked on the light as well. I couldn't tell what it was, but it scared the hell out of me. I suddenly thought of the movie I'd recently seen, Jurassic Park, when the actor was explaining how raptors attack. How one will draw your attention, while 2 more sneak up on you and attack from the side. I suddenly felt very vulnerable, as if someone was sneaking up behind me. I whipped around, pointing with my gun and flashlight, my eyes darting all around, but I couldn't see anything. I shone my light back inside, but the eyes were gone. This didn't comfort me. In fact, it did the opposite. I was in a panic. I felt like I was surrounded, and they were just toying with me. I didn't even know who they were. I took a few deep breaths to get myself under control. I knew panic led to bad decisions, and I couldn't afford any bad decisions out here on my own. I shone my light back toward the camper and saw a shadow dart out of the light. I knew it was all or nothing. There was no backing out. I was being hunted, just like that family had been. I didn't know what was hunting me, but it didn't matter. Whoever or whatever, it was dangerous. Focus, I told myself. Stay on your toes, remember your training. Even though my training also said don't get yourself in a bad situation. It was already too late for that. Something was near the camper. I still had no idea if this family was dead or alive. The only things I had to go on were mysterious footprints and a scream. It was the stuff of every horror movie ever made. I just hoped I didn't end up as one of the victims that died a horrible gory death to save some stupid teenagers who risked their own lives by blundering into something they should have left alone. I sighed, turned my light back to the ground, and followed the footprints. I noticed for the first time there were other marks among the footprints. They had been walked over and obscured, but it looked like two long lines, like someone was being dragged. I brought my flashlight back up just in time to see a set of eyes disappear behind a building on the other side of the street. I stepped up to the next building and shone my light inside to find much the same as the first, minus the eyes. I didn't linger long before turning my light back out to the streets and the other buildings. I felt like it somehow kept them at bay, as if they would work their way closer to me if I didn't shine my light their way. I didn't know how long this would last. I continued to the next building, with a larger building looming larger at the end of the street. It looked like it was an old church. There was the rough shape of a steeple that had partially collapsed. I turned and flashed my light back to the street to keep the hunters back. When I stepped up to the window of the next building and shone my light inside, I found bones, piles of bones. Most looked like they were from smaller animals, but there were larger ones interspersed with them. I was sure I spotted a couple of human femurs. I tried my radio again, but it still wasn't working. The vibration in the air was getting stronger. It was oppressive, like the pressure you feel when you're underwater. The stillness in the air magnified any sound. I could hear the footsteps of someone behind me, but when I turned, I couldn't see anyone. I left the bone storage building and headed for the last building at the end of the street, the church. I walked up to the doors, and they were very plain. 2 wooden doors, no Gothic architecture, no cross, just a couple of wooden doors that looked like they were about to fall off their hinges. I hesitated, turned, and looked back down the street. I knew they were there but couldn't see them. This was where they'd been hurting me all along. I held my gun and flashlight at the ready, knowing I was in for a fight. As soon as the doors opened, I took a deep, cleansing breath, then shoved the doors open. I shone my light all around, my eyes darting to all the dark corners, except they weren't dark. There were candles lit all around. It was quite beautiful. It was also quite empty. There was no one there, even empty, and well lit. It gave off a creepy vibe. Why do empty churches always do that? You would think it would be the opposite. My senses went on high alert. I didn't trust it. It must be a trap. As I continued to scan back and forth, looking for any hiding spots among the pews, I noticed there was one person there, in the first pew, bent over so I could barely see them. I slowly made my way forward, head on a swivel as I approached the lone figure. When I was nearly there, it looked like they were barely breathing. I came around in front of the creature and aimed my gun. She looked up at me. She was naked, and her hands and mouth were bound. As soon as she saw me, she started screaming into the gag in her mouth. She was screaming so hard her face turned red. I reached down and slid the gag off her mouth. "It's a trap," she screamed. I looked up and saw my worst nightmare. There were creatures, dozens of them. Each one looked vaguely human, but they were deformed. There was one that had one healthy arm, and a second that was shriveled up. One had only a single leg, but still managed to hop toward me. Another had no legs, but used its arms to crawl on the floor. None of them had a full set of teeth, but they all had a look of hunger and rage in their eyes. They came from everywhere. Some even crawled their way down from hiding places in the ceiling, like some horrific Spider-Man. They swarmed toward the front of the church. I looked around for anywhere to go, anywhere to hide, when I locked eyes on a door that looked like it was a closet. "Come on," I said, grabbing her arm and dragging her over to the door. "No, I can't. Please don't make me," she said, tugging against me. "We go in here or we die," I said, cutting the ropes around her wrists and putting my jacket over her shoulders. She reluctantly came along with me as the horde of creatures was nearly on us. "Quick," I said, opening the door and shoving her through. I slammed it shut behind me, taking out my knife and jamming it into the wooden doorframe to keep it shut. I turned and nearly ran her over. She hadn't moved. She was standing there staring into the dark. I shone my flashlight in front of us and saw a rickety staircase descending into the darkness. "Please don't make me go down there," she whimpered. "We don't have a choice," I said. "They'll be through this door soon." The pounding had gotten louder. She turned toward the door, then pulled my jacket closer around her and took a deep breath. I stepped around her and led the way, shining my light all around, trying to make sure we wouldn't run into any surprises. The boards creaked menacingly with every step I took. I couldn't see what was underneath, but had no desire to find out the fast way. I looked back and she was still staring down. I held my hand out, and she slowly took one step, then another. Her bare feet were filthy. I wondered if she was getting splinters as she took each step slowly and gingerly, as if walking on hot coals. After she had taken a few steps, I turned back to guide our way. The stairway was long and attached to an uneven stone wall. At some points, it jutted out far enough I had to squeeze around to get to the next step. It was getting colder as we descended. I started missing my jacket, but knew she needed it more. The spider webs weren't helping my anxiety either. I wondered if they were made by the deadly breed. I glanced back and saw she was still working her way down the stairs. When I looked forward again, there was a creature coming up the stairs toward me. I didn't think, just reacted. I barely had the gun pointed until I fired. The creature fell back with shock frozen on its face and tumbled down the stairs. I instantly regretted my action, as my ears were already ringing from the gunshot in such an enclosed place. I turned around to check on her, but she was curled up in the fetal position, sitting on a step, ears covered, rocking back and forth. "It's okay," I tried to say, but my voice sounded strange. "I guess temporary deafness will do that." At least I hoped it was temporary. She didn't look at me. I was unsure if she had heard me, so I touched her shoulder, and she immediately recoiled and climbed several stairs, backing away. I bent down to her. "Look, I know you're scared. I would be too, but if we're going to get out of this, we have to do it together. If I'm going to have to check on you every few steps, we'll be helpless if another one of those things attacks. I don't want to go down there," she stammered. I looked ahead and then back at her. "We have no choice." I turned and started down the stairs again. After around a dozen steps, I turned to see she had stood and was slowly making her way down again. I kept going until I made it to the bottom and kicked the corpse of the creature out of our way. I looked around, but there wasn't much to see. It was a passageway made of the same rough-cut rock walls and a dirt floor. I turned to see her make it to the last step. Her eyes were wide with fear. I could only imagine what she had already been through. She looked away as she stepped past the corpse. I decided to make a little conversation as we walked down the endless passageway to get her to focus on something other than our situation. "You're from the camper, aren't you?" I said. She nodded absently as she stared at the floor. "Were you going on vacation?" Another nod. I saw the kids' toothbrushes on the bathroom sink. "How many kids do you have?" Her eyes glazed over. "2 boys. And your husband is with you?" She nodded. "Where were you headed?" "Vegas." "What made you stop here?" "The kids wanted to see the abandoned town." Tears streamed down her dirty cheeks, making lines on her face. "Would you like me to stop talking?" She nodded. We continued forward in silence. The chill of the place made me shiver, but not just because of the temperature. The thought of being attacked at any moment was more than keeping me on my toes. It was wearing on my nerves. After some distance, we came to an opening that stretched out into a full room. She stopped and stared. I was puzzled at first until I noticed the smell. It was the stench of death. I shone my light around the room. The first corner I came to held a pile of bones. There was no denying these ones were human. They were large and the right shape. There were even a couple of full torsos still together that hadn't deteriorated yet. In the next corner, there were 3 bodies hanging from the dirt ceiling. It looked like a man and 2 boys. They had been strung up by their arms and were covered in blood. There were innumerable cuts and puncture wounds, but the most horrid sight were the many bites that were taken out of them. She collapsed and began to sob. I knew right away this was her family. "I'm so sorry," I said. She looked at me with a mix of hopelessness and rage. "I tried to tell you not to come down here," she said with quiet forcefulness. "I'm sure we can find some way to." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand," she said, looking me straight in the eyes for the first time. "This is the trap." She stood up straight for the first time since I'd seen her in the church, took off my jacket, and tossed it behind her. She was beautiful, even though she was covered in filth. "My children need food," she said, stretching out her arm. In an instant, 2 deformed creatures appeared and stood beside her. She stroked the thinning hair on their heads as they cooed at her. "So, there was no woman in the camper," I said, trying to stall for time until I could come up with a plan. "Oh, no, there was a woman. She was taken to the birthing house. She will give my children their own children, against her will, of course." She looked at me with disdain. "She is a tool we will use to survive, just like my ancestors were treated as tools to be used in the mines." I glanced around the room and saw several more creatures emerge from the shadows and advance slowly toward me. I knew I was trapped. My mind scrambled for some plan, any plan to escape the horrors that waited for me. I glanced at the 3 bloody, mangled bodies dangling from the ceiling and knew that would be my fate. I made my decision and didn't hesitate to implement it. In a flash, I drew my pistol and shot her in the forehead. The sound was still echoing when I started to run back to the passageway I had come from. I hoped that the shock of seeing their mother die would give me a head start before the horde of creatures hunted me down and tore me to shreds. Time seemed to move in slow motion. I felt like I was running underwater. Every move, every step seemed incredibly slow. I knew they would catch me. There was no doubt in my mind. It was only a matter of time. The only thing that kept me from giving up was the sheer will to live. I swung the flashlight as I ran, making shadows jump and fly around. I arrived at the bottom of the stairs much sooner than I thought possible and threw myself up them 2 at a time, praying that I didn't trip. The horde was hot on my heels. I could hear them getting closer. The grunts and snarls spurred me on even faster. I felt something brush against my heel and knew I had to act. I didn't bother to look back. I fired 2 shots into the closest one. I heard the inhuman scream and the sound of falling bodies. I risked a glance back to see them all tumbling down the stairs. I breathed a sigh of relief as I reached the door and struggled to pry my knife out of the wood. After a few agonizingly long seconds, it came free and I dove through the door. Much to my surprise and relief, the church was empty. They must have all gone another way to trap me below. I looked over at the dozens of glowing candles and ran straight toward them, knocking over as many as I could. I ran to the far wall and did the same on my way out the door. Once I was through, I turned back and jammed my knife into the doors so they wouldn't open. I didn't waste time celebrating my close escape. I ran down the middle of the street so I would have a good view of anyone or anything chasing me. It didn't take long until I heard footsteps behind. They sounded more like a pack of dogs chasing me. I glanced back and sure enough, there were a half-dozen deformed creatures in hot pursuit against the backdrop of the church engulfed in flame. I took some solace in the fact that at least some of the unnatural bastards must have burned up in the blaze. I had a stitch in my side, and my leg muscles burned, but I didn't dare slow down. Even at the speed I was running, they were catching up. I wasn't sure if I would make it to the truck before they got me. It was going to be close. I reached the truck and breathed a sigh of relief that I hadn't locked it. By the time I got the keys in the ignition and started it, they were on me. I locked the doors and slammed it into reverse as the first body flew into my windshield, shattering it. I got some momentum going as another landed on my hood and another grabbed my door handle. I swung the truck around and slammed on the brakes, sending them flying. I threw it in drive and stomped on the gas, spraying gravel. I hadn't gone more than a few yards when another freak landed in the truck bed and started pounding on the cab roof. I could see the dents getting deeper. It would be through soon. Suddenly the pounding stopped. I kept my eye on the road, but turned to see what was happening. It smashed through my rear window, grabbing me by the neck. I swerved to try to break its grip, to no avail. I could feel myself starting to black out. I knew that would be a death sentence. I pointed my gun out the window, but the creature grabbed it before I could aim at its head. My mind raced faster than the truck that was hurtling down the dirt road at breakneck speeds. I was seeing stars. I knew it was a matter of minutes until the end, if not seconds. I squeezed the trigger. The gun went off right beside its head, missing it by a few inches. I was done. It howled in pain and fear at the sound and the heat of the round going off. Amazingly, it let go of the gun. I aimed at its head and squeezed the trigger again. Blood rained on me as its head snapped back and it fell into the bed of the truck with a heavy thump. I set the gun on the seat beside me as I breathed huge gulps of air, wiping the blood out of my eyes. My vision returned just in time for the turn onto the main road. The tires screeched as they bit into the asphalt. On the way to the ranger station, I got there shortly after sunrise, pulled into a parking space, and sat back in the seat. Exhaustion and adrenaline crash sapped my energy. I fell asleep. I woke to the sound of someone knocking on my window. I whipped around, grabbed the gun off the seat, and swung it back around at the window. "Whoa there, son," the older ranger said, raising his hands. "What's got your panties in a bunch?" I took a deep breath, lowered the gun and the window, then told him the whole story. The longer I went, the more serious he became. Until the story was done, his face was made of granite. He stuck his hand in the window. "Keys," he said. I pulled the keys out of the ignition and handed them to him. "Go inside and get yourself cleaned up," he said. "I'll take care of this." I stepped out of the truck on shaky legs and walked into the ranger station, threw away my bloody uniform, and took a long shower. By the time I had finished and changed into a fresh uniform, the other ranger was back. He stepped inside the station and scanned the room until he found me. "All taken care of," he said with a crooked smile. "What do you mean?" I said. "Did you call the police?" He looked around at the handful of rangers that were milling around the room. "Yeah, we're not gonna get the police involved in this," he said. "What? Why not?" He looked at me with an odd determination in his eyes. "So you really killed her, did you?" he said. "Of course, it was her or me. Most of the folks around here give that place a wide berth," he said. "There's signs all over saying no trespassing and danger. You'd think it was almost natural selection for those who ignore all the warnings. But those travelers, and then there are others who visit the place on the down low, all quiet like," he said. "Those folks might say you robbed them of their fun. He might even call them conjugal visits. There might even be some of those folks in this very room." I stared at him in disbelief, then looked around the room and saw every set of eyes focused on me. There wasn't a smile, or even a hint of one that suggested this was a joke. He clapped his hand on my shoulder. "Why don't you head home and rest today?" he said. "You've had a long night. We'll take care of things." He ushered me toward the door, pausing before opening it. "Just remember that nothing happened," he said, "because if the police get an anonymous phone call, we might have to drive out and grab a couple of children to come visit your house in the middle of the night. You get me?" I nodded my head in a daze as he opened the door. That's the story I tell when people don't take the hint and stay away from the town. It's been years, and every once in a while I hear of travelers that disappeared in the area. I shake my head and wonder. The emergency alert on my phone went off with a shrill noise, repeating 3 times and vibrating angrily just as I was bringing the last of my belongings into the cabin. I took the device from my pocket and stared at it in disbelief for at least a minute before the realization set in that I would have to leave. Only moments after arriving, my hands were shaking from the cold as I read through it again. Severe weather alert, heavy snowfall in the Frontenac region is expected to begin tomorrow. 60 to 80 centimeters of precipitation. Not good. I realized the roads would be impassable by this time the following day. That meant I would have to leave early the next morning to avoid being stuck on the roads in the blizzard, which subsequently meant 0 ice fishing time for me. I'd be lucky to make it home before it started coming down in earnest. Moments later, messages started coming in from my 3 friends who had planned to join me. The group chat notification popped up on my phone, and I opened it. Did you see the emergency alert about the storm? I guess the trip's off. What a bunch of BS. Ted, oh my god, a generational storm is what they're calling it now. Looks like we'll have to postpone for a few weeks. I hope you didn't go through with your plan to go up a day early, Jay. Greg, no kidding. What are the chances this blizzard hits on our ice fishing weekend? I messaged back, saying I understood we'd have to reschedule. I told them that I'd made the trip up alone, accompanying the messages with forehead slapping emojis. It sucks that I'll be stuck up here alone, I thought to myself. My dog, Gibson, pawed at my leg and I smiled at her, feeling slightly reassured by her presence. Yeah, you're right, Gibby. I'm not completely alone. At least, I've got you here with me. After putting down a bowl of water and another containing kibble, my next priority was to start a fire in the small black stove at the center of the main living area. There was wood stacked up in a neat pile next to it and small bags containing kindling, which we'd brought with us in the summer and left behind. At first glance it looked like a large enough stack, but I knew from experience I would need twice as much as it appeared to make it through the night, so I went outside to gather more from beneath the boathouse. The family cottage was a rustic one, to put it mildly. There was no running water, no electricity, and the cabin was poorly insulated. Perennially procrastinated repairs were needed in more than one place, including the floor beneath one bed which had partially collapsed, letting in a slight trickle of cold air from outside. It was drafty, and I could hear the sounds of mice which had made their way in through the gaps, burrowing in the bedroom and finding their way into an old coat or a sleeping bag that someone had left behind. I sighed as I lit the kerosene lamps which were scattered on wobbly tables around the main living area. There was something about having vermin in the cottage that set me on edge, but at least Gibson's presence would keep them at a distance. After filling the place with a warm flickering glow from the half-dozen kerosene lamps, I felt a little better. There was reassurance in having fire, and I started working on making a big one in the stove that would keep me warm through the night. I loosely wadded up some newspaper and then stacked dry kindling on top, making a teepee. Over that, I added larger pieces of wood until it was piled up to the ceiling of the small stove. Then I lit a strip of cardboard and held it up to the paper inside, catching it alight from several places, watching as it began to burn and then flared up in a bright, white-orange glow. Holding my hands up to the fire, I watched it and warmed myself up. Eventually, I took off my boots and my coat, the entire cottage gradually getting toasty. There was no sense unpacking, I thought, taking a beer out of the cooler and opening it. I took a sip and couldn't help but grimace at the taste. I'd never tried the brand before and I'd picked it up on a recommendation. It was awful and lukewarm to boot, par for the course considering the trip so far. I took out my phone and watched Netflix while the beer went flat beside me. I lifted Gibson up onto the futon with me so that she was off the floor and close to the fire where it was warm. Eventually, I got bored of office reruns and called it a night, adding another log to the fire and reminding myself to wake up in an hour to keep it going, pulling the futon even closer to the stove so that it was as close to the fire as safety would allow. I curled up in my sleeping bag and drifted off into an uncomfortable slumber, constantly tossing and turning, trying to stay warm, but not succeeding. I woke up to the sound of whining coming from Gibson trembling on the bed beside me. I was so cold that I was actually scared. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and I realized a few hours had passed. The fire had gone out completely, reduced to mere embers at the base of the stove. I put on my jacket and blew hot breath onto my fingers, pulling Gibson closer to me. She was shaking badly as well. My hands were trembling as I put more newspaper and kindling onto the fire, blowing into the embers and hoping they would reignite. My lungs felt frozen and my heart was beating fast, my skin prickling with pins and needles turning into total numbness in my extremities. I'd never felt so cold in my life and realized it was far beyond the weather forecasted on the news. It seemed like it was minus 30 degrees and steadily dropping further. Terrified that I would not be able to get my body temperature back up, my mind started racing, thinking of worst-case scenarios. If I couldn't stop shaking pretty soon, it would be impossible to start a fire again. I recalled that my truck was just outside and I could get in there and start it up, turning on the heat until I felt warm again. But the idea of getting out there and the truck refusing to start was too much to take, and considering the state of the beat-up old Ford, that seemed like a distinct possibility. So I continued stoking the fire, blowing on the precious few embers and adding more newspaper every so often until a tiny flame had begun to grow. I held my shaking hands up to the measly fire and added pieces of kindling sparingly, one by one, terrified of it going out again. Pulling Gibson closer, we shared each other's warmth, and I began to feel half human again. A sound came from outside the cabin suddenly, startling me. and causing me to jump, my heart skipping a beat then pounding faster and faster in my chest. A noise like fingernails being dragged across the siding could be heard from all around, echoing in the small space. Something was going from one end of the cottage to the other, attempting to get inside. Deep, guttural breathing could be heard, grunting and snorting, desperate as it scraped its talons against the boarded-up windows. Gibson began to whine, making high-pitched noises as she huddled closer to me, and I put my hand over her muzzle, muffling her sounds. Was it a bear? I wondered and realized I was holding my breath. I thought about the holes in the flimsy facade of the cabin, the spot beneath the bed where mice were getting in. I thought about the broken screen door and the wooden one behind that which needed to be replaced, almost falling off its rusty hinges. The entire cottage felt so frail and insecure all of a sudden as I heard the loud noise of whatever that thing was, breathing heavily just outside, trying to get in. Maybe it was too cold out there even for it. The ground shook with the weight of the creature as it made its way around the cabin. I was so focused on it that I didn't notice the fire going out again at first. As it fizzled down to embers, I continued holding my breath until it was gone, and then I relit the fire, my shaking hands barely able to get it going again. Once it was burning hot, I didn't sleep anymore. I pulled Gibson close, and the two of us stayed up all night watching the fire with weary eyes, taking occasional glances at the door. Even once we were both warm, we continued to shiver. When the sun came up, I didn't notice at first. It was dark in the cottage 1 minute, and then it was light. I blinked my eyes a few times and rolled out of bed, deciding I would waste no more time before leaving. I just hoped the bear or whatever had been outside the night before was gone. Gibson was scratching at the front door, asking to be let outside to pee, which told me it was probably safe now. In the light of the morning, all that had happened seemed like a bad nightmare, and I told myself maybe it had been, until I got outside and saw the claw marks which marred the exterior walls. Shuddering, I threw my belongings in the truck, doused the fire with too much water, and took one last look at the place. What a bad weekend this turned out to be, I thought to myself. With more people around, it was easier to keep the fire going, taking turns feeding it with wood so that everyone could sleep through the night. But it was frightening being up here by myself, even with Gibson by my side. I'd never done it before in the winter, and I never would again. There were too many things that could go wrong. A freak snowstorm, a fallen tree blocking the road, getting stuck or going into a ditch, and those were just the beginning. I wanted to get out of here before any of those things happened. The truck didn't want to start at first. I turned the key in the ignition twice, hearing only a click and the absence of any engine noise. Cursing loudly, I checked to make sure I hadn't left an interior light on, or something which could have drained the battery. Satisfied there was still a charge, I tried one more time, and finally the old thing let out a cough and kicked into life. The engine began to sputter before finally settling into a steady, rusted purr. "All right, Gibson, let's get out of here," I said, rubbing the dog's head and smiling as she blinked her eyes. She looked content in the front seat, happy to be back in the truck and out of the old cottage. There was a thin layer of snow on the gravel road, and the tires got moving easily enough. I looked up to see the sky was turning gray above me, and a few white flakes were just beginning to fall. The weather was making an early appearance. I turned on the radio, and sure enough they said the same thing I was thinking. The storm would be arriving early. By noon, the highway would be a parking lot. Whiteout conditions. Be prepared to be trapped in your car. Have emergency supplies ready. My anxiety was through the roof as I went around a bend in the road. Hitting the gas, I came to the first big hill and went over it, seeing something strange up ahead as I came over the rise. Whatever it was blocking the road. Massive and brown, the lumpy, furry shape got bigger as I pulled up in front of it. The bear which had been trying to get into my cottage the night before was dead, lying in the middle of the gravel road and blocking it completely. At first I thought it had frozen to death. I got out of my truck to inspect it and was surprised to find there was a horrible smell coming from the carcass. It was a chemical smell, noxious and unpleasant, like some sort of factory waste. The snow had melted all around the beast, and blood and entrails were pooling around the far side. What the hell could do such a thing? Aren't bears at the top of the food chain? alpha predators. Gibson was by my side, but she did not venture near the body. Usually she would be curious, trying to sniff at something like that, but she stayed next to me, emitting a low growl. The road was completely blocked, I realized. There was no way out, not unless I could move it. But no matter which way I attempted it, the giant body of the dead bear would not budge. It weighed a ton. There were large trees on either side of the road, too close to drive past. There was only one other way out, which was by driving across the frozen lake, and that way was risky. I hadn't been able to test the thickness of the ice yet. It would need to be nearly a foot deep for me to feel comfortable, but there was a clear way on and off the ice if it came down to it. I got back in the truck and threw it in reverse, since there was nowhere to turn around. I felt sick to my stomach, nervous with anticipation and fear, uncertain of how I was going to get out of here. Once back in front of the cottage, I got out of the truck and went down to the ice with my spud. Walking out onto the lake, I cleared a spot with my boot and began to dig with the sharpened metal rod. Satisfied that I'd found the bottom of the ice, I put the tape measure through the hole, hoping it would be close to a foot. Looking at the tape measure, my heart sank. The ice was barely 7 inches thick, just below the minimum 8 inches where it would be safe to drive a vehicle across. And my truck was on the heavier side. I would feel more comfortable if it was a full foot thick or more. I pulled out my phone and checked for a signal, deciding it was time to call someone for help. Who I would call, I still wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't get out of this jam by myself. Of course, I muttered out loud, seeing the signal bar was down to 0, and the words "no service" were printed across the top of the screen. Surely I would have gotten another severe weather alert by now, I realized, had it not been for the total lack of cell signal, because snow was now being dumped down on me from above, and the sky had turned nearly black with the approaching storm. I typed out a message in the group chat, telling them my situation, hitting send regardless of the lack of signal. I knew from experience that it would go through eventually. I just hoped it would be sooner rather than later. Gibson let out a loud, high-pitched whine. Her tone rose in volume and she began to bark. High, persisting yips that were totally unlike her. She backed away, then let out a stream of urine, her hind legs trembling. As she did, I looked up from my phone and saw what her eyes had spotted. Across the lake, something was moving in the trees. I saw fingers wrapping around a tree trunk, too high up, the nails too long, and too sharp to be a person's. Whatever this giant was, it looked similar to a man, but it was massive. It peered out at me from between the boughs of trees, its head probably 15 feet off the ground. Its skeletal limbs matched the monochromatic tone of the birches on either side of it, a gray, pale white shade. I couldn't distinguish the entire form of it in the shadows, but I could make out its eyes. They reflected back at me, catching the gray light coming through the clouds. And then I saw its mouth spread wider in a grin, teeth dripping blood, and it disappeared back into the darkness. The temperature felt like it had dropped to 30 below freezing again as I began to shiver involuntarily and looked down to see Gibson was doing the same. There was only one choice, only one place where we could go, the cabin. It was either that or risk plunging the truck into a frozen lake, attempting to drive across. We were on a small peninsula surrounded by water on all sides, only one way in or out, and that way was blocked by the body of a giant brown bear. I took the dog back inside the cottage and locked the doors, taking uneasy glances outside through the cracks in the boarded up windows. What the hell was that thing in the forest? I asked myself over and over again, but no answer would come to mind. There was no creature I could think of that was 15 feet tall, with reflective eyes, which stood on 2 legs like a man, capable of disemboweling a full-grown bear, capable of causing the temperature to plunge all around me. There was only one creature capable of that, and it wasn't supposed to exist. It was something from myth, and from folklore, from legends that aren't supposed to be real. It's a Wendigo, I said aloud, immediately regretting the words, as if saying them made it true, as if saying them would summon it. Wendigos are supernatural creatures born of Canadian First Nations folklore. They live in cold, remote places and make people go mad merely through their presence. They thrive on the hunger, despair, and loneliness of their victims, who usually live in remote communities. They drive families apart, instilling urges of cannibalism in people and making them want to consume their own loved ones. During the lean, hard months of winter, They turn people into raving cannibals, driving away all their loved ones. And then, once you're alone, the Wendigo strikes. It either consumes you while you're still alive, tearing the flesh from your bones, while you beg and scream, or it turns you into one of its own kind. But the Wendigo's greatest curse is that no matter how much flesh it consumes, it only grows hungrier. With every ounce of meat it takes in, it grows taller and more emaciated. Its hunger grows more insatiable with its height until it is a towering beast with its head amongst the treetops. As it roams the forest, constantly searching for its next meal, Gibson whimpered and burrowed her face into my armpit as if hearing my inner thoughts. Trying to reassure her, I stroked her fur and told her it would be okay, although I had a feeling it wouldn't be. I tried to get the fire going again, but it was a fruitless effort. Everything inside the stove was damp and wet, and I scolded myself for dousing the fire with so much water. Still, I kept at it, knowing we might be stuck there for a while. Pretty soon the wind was howling and blowing outside, and the snow was piling up in front of the door. I made a point of opening it every so often and clearing the front steps, knowing that I would need firewood, taking weary glances off into the forest across the lake as I did so. Finally, I got the fire started, a low, guttering flame in the stove which wanted to go out all the time. Everything was damp, but I kept feeding fresh kindling into it, nursing it until it kept going by itself. Hours passed as we waited to either run out of firewood or be attacked by the creature. We were running low on kindling, and the sun was beginning to set, my stomach rumbling with hunger when I felt something strange. The ground was suddenly shaking beneath my feet, and I heard Gibson whining from beside me. "What is it, girl?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat as I realized the answer. There was the creature. It was back. The dining table began to rattle and bounce up and down as whatever was outside got closer, and I imagined the huge creature lifting the roof from the cabin like the cloche on a dish in a fancy restaurant, picking me up and eating me whole like a wriggling shrimp. A second later, there was a sound at the front door of metal being ripped and sheared. As I realized the creature was making its way in, the screen door landed on the ground with a crash, and then the wooden door was being torn from its hinges an instant later. Cold air rushed inside as Gibson began to let out shrill, panicked barks of terror. I heard the thing tearing apart the front entrance, easily ripping apart the wood, and making the doorway larger so that it could come inside. I tipped over the dining room table to use it as a barricade. I picked up a chair, the only weapon I could find nearby, thinking I would throw it at the thing's face to defend us, when I heard a strange noise from out front. It was a car horn honking. Someone had come to save me. I heard a loud ding and pulled out my phone, and saw the green checkmark beside my group chat message, indicating at some point it had gone through, at some brief moment, when there'd been a gap in the clouds. Reading the one new received message on my phone, a hopeful smile spread across my face. "Matt, you just had to skip town a day early and go ice fishing, didn't you? What the hell was that thing?" Ted was yelling from outside. "I don't know, but it's trying to get inside." "Jay, are you there?" I shouted back that I was. There was a loud screech from outside which I realized had come from the monster. They'd actually wounded it somehow. I ran to the front door with Gibson and looked up, seeing the creature for the first time. It stood with its back to us, its head among the treetops, even taller than it had appeared at first. My friends had caught it off guard, but now it was fully aware of them, and it was going after them. The Wendigo was distracted by something in front of the cottage, and I realized one of my friends had gotten out of the car, and they were using themselves as bait so that I could flee the cottage safely. They had driven across the ice with their lighter vehicle, just as I had hoped to do. I guessed that they'd also run into trouble moving the body of the giant bear, which blocked the road. "Jay," Ted screamed out the window, driving the car in circles on the ice, as if too terrified to stay still. I raced over to the car, slipping and sliding on the lake ice. It was Matt who was distracting the Wendigo, I realized, and I called for him to get away from the thing. It was too large and too fast. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but that was Matt. He was always the act first, think later type. Not only that, but he often put himself in harm's way for his friends. He turned to look at me and gave a thumbs up, his attention diverted from the creature for a split second too long. As Gibson and I got into the car, we heard his screams, and I looked to see the Wendigo had closed the distance in an instant and was picking him up like an insect, turning him and taking bites from him in places. As Matt screamed for help, the creature peeled off his skin, exposing his skull as he ate his face. The calls for help turned to bubbling gurgles and wet, choked sounds, and I nearly got out of the car to run after him, but Ted grabbed my wrist and pulled me back inside. "You can't save him," he said with wet, red-rimmed eyes, and eventually I relented. We raced away across the icy lake, making a path through the blizzard, cutting a swath out of the fresh fallen snow on our way back to the main roads. For a while, we debated what to do. Should we call the police? Our friend had just died after all, but we knew that if we did, we would be considered suspects. And with no other reasonable explanation, they would pin the death on us. They would say we killed him. There was no box you could check on an official police report citing a Wendigo attack. After all, such things didn't exist. They were myths, legends. As it turned out, we wouldn't have to worry about it. A message popped up from Matt on the group chat just a few minutes after we got home, and I had to tell myself it wasn't all just a nightmare, a hallucination from the cold, and from lack of sleep and food. But Ted and Greg both told me I hadn't imagined it. What we saw was real, as much as I wish it wasn't. The three of us read the message on the group chat again and again. My heart was beating fast, and a sick knot was growing in my stomach, bile rising in my throat that I could taste inside my mouth. Matt, "Hey guys, you really missed out on a feast. Ice fishing is just as much fun in a blizzard, if not more. Let's reschedule the trip for next weekend." "Okay, I'll be waiting for you here." As much as we don't want to go, we've resolved that we have to. We can't leave Matt like that. We have to help him. Next weekend, we're making the trip back up there, even if it kills us. I have lived with my girlfriend for 8 months. We've been together for 18 months. We moved in together when she lost the lease on her apartment, and my parents hinted that they'd like to turn my bedroom into an art room. I didn't mind moving out, and the timing just felt right. My girlfriend, I'll call her Linda, is a wonderful person, very warm and affectionate, very calm and chilled out. We split the chores and the bills equally and don't have any issues with intimacy or communication. But the only thing that has been a problem, for me at least, is how calm and controlled she is. I know that doesn't sound like a bad thing, and really it isn't, I guess, but she never seems to get excited about anything. She enjoys things quietly, dislikes things with the same amount of energy. She never reacts to anything without complete self-control. I started to wonder if she had the capacity for strong emotions, if there was some buried trauma causing her to stifle her reactions. And because our communication has always been so good, I had no problems asking her about it. She told me that honestly, she's not that bothered by anything, and doesn't see any reason to act out unnecessarily. It still bothered me though. She could watch a horror movie and not even flinch at jump scares. She will watch a comedy and just chuckle at the funniest bits. When we planned a trip to Disney World, something she said she's always wanted to do, she seemed quietly pleased and barely excited at all. I know it shouldn't matter, but recently I've been thinking about proposing to her, and part of me dreads her reaction if she says yes, which I'm fairly confident she will do as we've discussed marriage often, and she seems to be agreeable. I've been watching TikToks of women getting surprise proposals, and the way they react fills me with longing. They scream with joy, they cry, they violently hug their partner. They express their happiness so obviously, and I'd love to get that kind of response. But I feel like Linda will just smile and say yes and accept the ring. And whilst that will be great, there's part of me that wants more. So I've been doing stupid things. I know they're stupid, and I know you will judge me, but most things are harmless. I started when it was her birthday, set up a space in our home laden with gifts and balloons and flowers for her, and when she walked in and saw it, I fired off one of those things that shoots confetti and streamers everywhere. I did it fairly close to her, but she didn't flinch. She was pleased with the effort I'd made, especially as I was also cooking a romantic meal for her. She hovered round the kitchen chatting with me as I cooked, and when her back was turned, I dropped the metal lid from one of our pans right behind her. We have a slate floor, and the lid made a huge noise that made me cringe, even though I'd expected it, but she just turned around to see what the noise was. She had her eyebrows raised but that was the only expression of surprise she showed. I felt stupid and mean for the cheap trick, but somehow my failure made me determined to do more. I know I shouldn't have. It was childish and petty, not to mention unkind, but she just never budged. It started to piss me off, if I'm being honest. I was just lucky she was a patient woman and didn't seem to have any inkling that I was doing these things on purpose, although she did suggest it might be a good idea to make a doctor appointment, as I was quite clumsy recently. My efforts ended one night after I'd had a few too many beers, and I went too far. Linda had been working late, and I'd been moping around waiting for her to come home, when I found a mask I'd worn for Halloween, and it gave me an idea. We had a large pantry in our apartment with a door that was clear glass on the top half, and drunk me decided it would be a really funny idea to hide in the pantry wearing the mask and jump up when she came into the kitchen. I know, ridiculous. Even worse, I decided to hide my camera on the shelf in the pantry to film her reaction, with a vague idea of uploading it to TikTok if it went well. As stoic as she was, she would surely react to a monster jumping up at her from behind the pantry door, wouldn't she? I set everything up and waited, turning the kitchen light off. She came home not long after I'd shut myself in the pantry, and I heard her calling to me as she walked around the apartment. I had a chance then to call it off. I should have done that. I heard her come into the kitchen, saw the light turn on, then heard her wandering around collecting stuff from the drying rack to put it away. When her footsteps got close enough, I jumped up, snarling, and slapping my hands against the glass. Childish as my prank was, I didn't consider how she might actually react. Part of me hoped she'd at least scream, and part of me thought she'd just step back away from the door in her usual, collected way. What she did was a natural reaction for anyone, I think. She threw the object in her hand at the glass of the door towards the intruder that had sprung up to threaten her. The object was a large, cast iron pan. I knew it was heavy as I'd had to heave it up onto the drying rack when I'd washed it earlier, so it broke through the glass with ease. The round, blackened surface of the bottom of the pan approaching my head was the last thing I remembered before waking up in the hospital. I suffered a concussion that thankfully didn't cause any serious damage, but along with that I had sustained a broken jaw, a broken nose, a shattered cheekbone, and a fracture in the bone around my eye socket. I also had some lacerations from the broken glass, some of which required stitches, but weren't life-threatening. Still, I had been lucky. Linda was full of apologies when I woke up, but how could I blame her? She was deeply distraught in her own way about what she'd done. But as soon as they gave me a pad and pen to write messages, I told her I forgave her and asked if she could forgive me for the stupid prank I had played. She stayed by my bedside as much as she could during my recovery, keeping me entertained and bringing me home-cooked meals. And there wasn't a day I didn't despise myself for the idiotic stunt I pulled, and not a day I wasn't grateful for this wonderful woman that really put things in perspective. She may not be a hugely demonstrative woman, and she may not react in a normal fashion to many things, but she cared for me, and we could build an amazing life together. Once I was home, she set about taking care of me even more. She wouldn't let me lift a finger to do anything, even though I tried to fulfill my share of the chores, and rarely left me alone in case I needed something. She wasn't around all the time, however, and when she finally left to go to the grocery store, I had the chance to go into the pantry and retrieve the camera I'd hidden. I'd been anxious about her finding it. I'd hidden it well, but it would only have taken the shifting of a few items for it to have been discovered. She had forgiven me for my prank, but if she'd found I'd filmed it too, she would have been mortified and rightly upset. I had planned on simply deleting the footage I'd recorded. It was a painful memory of a moronic deed, but once I had the camera in my hands, I couldn't help but give in to the desire to watch the moment I'd been knocked out. A morbid fascination, maybe. The camera had filmed until the battery had run flat, and after I put in the charger I located the footage of me hiding it and crouching down in the dark. I watched through the camera's unwavering eye as the kitchen light came on, illuminating a bright square above my head. I saw the clear outline of Linda through the glass, as if she were on TV, moving around the kitchen, picking up the pan and making her way to the cabinet beside the pantry. And then I saw myself jump up. My darker silhouette blocked out most of the view of the kitchen, but I could see over my shoulder as Linda's arm raised, launching the pan at my head. She didn't make a sound, no shriek or gasp, and as I fell to the floor she walked up to the shattered window and looked in at me, framed by the jagged shards. Her eyes were wide and her mouth hung slightly open, but other than that, her face told nothing of her emotions. She opened the pantry door and looked down at me for a long time. Her head was down, so I couldn't see her face. I counted the seconds on the camera as they ticked past, and she stared down at my prone body for nearly a full minute. Then she bent down, and when she stood upright again she held the cast iron pan in her hands. After another 20 seconds of her scrutiny, she turned the pan around so that her right hand held the handle and raised her arm to waist height. Then she waited. After another 15 seconds I heard a noise, my voice, raised in a feeble moan. Only then did she move again. She only hit me once, but she put her whole arm into it, swinging from the shoulder, lifting the pan high then bringing it down. I heard the whistle of the pan traveling through the air, then the solid thud of it hitting my face. I thought I could even hear the crunch of my bones breaking, but my mind might have filled that detail in. She didn't stop to look at the damage she'd done, but simply went back into the kitchen. I heard water running as she presumably rinsed the blood from the bottom of the pan, then the clunk of it being returned to the dish rack. After another 30 seconds or so, I heard her voice from another room, faint but clear, asking for an ambulance. She has been at the grocery store for an hour and is probably due back very soon. I'm not sure what to do. What's the worst that could happen if you helped out your elderly neighbor? I found out, and I can never forget it. My mom means well, but she's a pain in the ass. I know what you're going to say, but just hear me out. I'm in the final year of high school, sending out college applications and everything. But then out of the blue she goes, help out Mr. Brandt next door with his mail and groceries, will you? What, like now? No, every day. He's getting old. He needs help. Why don't you do it? I wish I didn't ask that. Everybody except me knows to not ask your mom that. She gave me this look like she would tear me a new one, so the next day I was helping Mr. Brandt with his mail and groceries. I never really got to know Mr. Brandt before then. I don't think anybody really knows their neighbors anymore, but my only impression from him was that he was some cranky old guy that used to stare at me like he was angry at me or something. So I didn't know what to expect when I brought his mail to the door for the first time. Half a minute after knocking on the door opens to reveal Mr. Brandt. Gray hair, wrinkles, bad posture, holding a walking stick, classic old guy stuff. But that intense stare that I remembered was gone, replaced with a gentle smile and genuine excitement in his eyes. "You must be Carol's son from next door," he said with a distinct, raspy voice. I nodded, wasn't being rude or nothing, but Mr. Brandt teased me about it anyway. "She didn't say you were mute as well." "No, I mean, yeah, I'm her son. Just kidding. I kid. But really thank you. I really appreciate it. It's kind of hard getting around after my fall off the porch. I mentioned it to your mother, and she insisted that you would help out." "Thanks, Mom. It will only be temporary though, just a few months, and then you can go back chasing girls, or whatever it is you kids do these days. But I just have to ask, when the groceries arrive, could you bring them upstairs to the fridge?" I hesitated a little bit, but I thought why not? Didn't seem too unreasonable. He said it was only going to be for a few months, so yeah, I agreed. He gave me a copy of his house key, and when his groceries arrived at his front porch, I knocked on his front door, and from upstairs he yelled out in his distinct raspy voice, "Let yourself in, I'm up here." The door was unlocked, to my surprise, so I did let myself in. I picked up the groceries and headed up the stairs. His house was actually warm and inviting. The mahogany staircase reflected the sunlight shining through the windows and lit up all the photos of a younger Mr. Brandt on the walls. He was fishing, diving, driving jeeps, posing in front of airplanes. He had photos with his kids when he was younger, with his kids when they were older, with his grandkids now. It was honestly a side I'd never seen of Mr. Brandt. I don't know, I just hadn't thought about my neighbor, you know. Also partly explained why he still went upstairs, even though he's supposed to be recovering from a fall. When I reached the staircase, he called out again in his distinct raspy voice from the room at the end of the second-story hall. "In here, bring them here." Mr. Brandt was in a study room of sorts, He was sitting behind a large desk reading one of the thickest books I've ever seen. On all walls were stacks and stacks of bookcases and mismatched bookcases. Seriously, there was not two of the same bookcase in that room. The sunlight streaming through the window behind the desk gave Mr. Brandt a weird, soft glow as he looked up at and greeted me. "Thanks, kid," he said in distinct, raspy voice. "Just put 'em in the fridge next to you." I was so fixated on all the books that I didn't notice the small fridge to my left, with books stacked on top of it. I was half expecting books to be inside the thing as well, but there was only a bottle of milk in there. "Thanks for this. I really appreciate your mom organizing this for me." Mr. Brandt smiled as he said that, not at all like the old fogey I thought he was. "Yeah, no problem," I said as I unloaded the groceries in his fridge. Curiosity got the best of me, so I had to ask, "What's with all the books?" The old man chuckled. "When you got as much time as I do, you can argue through all the books you want. Suppose I'm a book hoarder." I actually learned about the old man, and it turned out he was kinda cool. Actually joined the Navy when he was straight out of high school, but ended up hating it, so he went to work for the city council doing maintenance jobs. He hated that but learned to live with it after he met his wife after the sewer pipe burst in front of her house. "Find a woman who loves you even when you're covered in crap," he told me. Started a family with her, settled down. He said he lived a happy and full life. I helped out with his groceries and garbage for over a week to help him recover from this fall. I really liked him, was always friendly, a really cool guy to know. But this isn't the story where I tell you what an awesome person my neighbor was. I really wish it was. As I said, it was over a week ago I was helping out Mr. Brandt, when one night I woke up when I thought I heard a scream. I checked my phone to see it was 2:43 a.m. and I just sat in bed for a few minutes. I could have sworn I heard someone scream, but it was so short that maybe I only dreamed it. Didn't think it was a big deal eventually. And it didn't seem like anybody else woke up, so I thought it was either me still dreaming or some random in the street who decided to stretch his vocal cords. I went back to sleep pretty quickly. The next day I didn't collect Mr. Brandt's mail until after school. With mail in hand I knocked on the door. No response. No biggie. I remembered Mr. Brandt said he sometimes liked to take a nap, so I should just knock again to wake him up. So I did, and I called out in case that didn't work. But still nothing. After half a minute or so, I decided that I would come inside and check on the old fella, make sure he's alright. When somewhere pretty close to the door I heard his distinct raspy voice call out, "Who is it?" The voice said, "It's just me. I've got your mail. I'll just come inside." "No, don't. There's no need." The voice shot back really quickly. It sounded like Mr. Brandt, but he sounded down, like he lacked energy or something. Even for 75, Mr. Brandt had a lot of energy, despite his fall. "You sure?" I asked, concerned. "Yes, drop the mail and go." I shrugged. It wasn't my mail, so why should I care? Well, I didn't drop it, but I did put his mail down before the door on the porch. But before I went, something got the better of me, and I had to ask, "Did you hear a yell or a scream last night, Mr. Brandt?" "I think some noise woke me up." There was a pause. I was now actually starting to get worried for Mr. Brandt. This was the first time he didn't want me to bring in his mail. He needed his mail, but I think he was also looking forward to having somebody to talk to. Eventually, the voice behind the door responded. No sound. I really started to get worried by the second day. It was grocery day. Milk, eggs, bread, all that. That's not important. What's important was when I knocked on the door, I got no response. It's not like Mr. Brandt goes anywhere so naturally. I started to freak out. I mean, what if he was dead lying on the floor somewhere? I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I didn't have a key on me either, so, and I'm not recommending anyone try this, but I tried opening one of the house's front windows. None of the front windows budged, so I thought going around the back door would be the best option. Got around the corner, and just as I passed the living room window, I jumped out of my skin. "What are you doing?" said Mr. Brandt, as his distinct raspy voice behind the curtain. Couldn't really get a good view of him. "Your groceries are here." And then you didn't answer, so I thought I'd try and check up on. Really, more like breaking and entering. Okay, this was starting to get a bit weird. Mr. Brandt was normally friendlier than this. Now he's behaving like some Japanese princess behind a curtain. "Did you want me to bring the groceries inside, Mr. Brandt?" No, he pulled back the curtain and just stared at me. There was something about his face. Granted, I'd never actually seen him angry before, but his face was bloated, drooping, sad. But above all, it was just terrifying. That was definitely Mr. Brandt. I was looking at through the window, but at the same time it wasn't. It was like he changed. Personality, attitude, his face. I just nodded. I thought I knew, but I guess not that well. I mean, it's only been a week, right? So I backed off sheepishly. All right, hope you're feeling better, Mr. Brandt. No response. He stared for a few moments and closed the curtain. What happened to that old guy? Nice and friendly to weird and creepy in less than 2 weeks. I told my mom about it later that night, and she just told me that old people are like that sometimes, but I shouldn't judge. I asked her if I should still be helping out Mr. Brandt, and she said of course I should. So the next day, I got Mr. Brandt's mail and knocked on the front door. No response. Mr. Brandt, I yelled out. He's dead, maybe. I know it's horrible to think about, but that was the first thing to cross my mind. I couldn't just leave him there, could I? No, I couldn't. So I went around the back to the back door and opened it. When I opened it, a shiver ran down my spine. It was the same old house I'd been in heaps of times before, but there was stillness in the air. I just knew Mr. Brandt was in trouble, if not dead. So I called out again, not that I was expecting him to respond, but I hope he did. He didn't, though. I walked to the base of the stairs and was half expecting his dead body there, an accidental fall or something, so you can imagine my relief when there was no Mr. Brandt lying there. That just left upstairs. After some deep breaths, I started going up the stairs, each step creaking underneath my weight. It was like some backwards organ at a funeral. Freaked me out. Anyway, I got to the second story, and that's when the smell hit me. Legit, never smelled anything like it before. I guess if I had to describe it, it's like if you ducked your head in a rancid bin the night before it gets collected. But you know it was worse. I don't know why, but I knew what I was smelling was death. I just knew it. My heart dropped when that thought entered my head. Each step towards Mr. Brandt's study was slow. I was just hoping Mr. Brandt would hop out of his study and go, "Kidding, I'm alright. Then I can go back to normal." Nope. The closer I got, the more I knew this wasn't going to end well. Each step took me closer to something I didn't want to see. I wanted to just turn around and let someone else deal with it. But I got his mail and groceries for the past week, so I sort of felt responsible, you know, like I should be the one to find Mr. Brandt. When I reached the doorway, I stopped, took a deep breath of the air that smelled like death, and turned into Mr. Brandt's office. His face was missing. Mr. Brandt's body was sitting in the chair behind the desk, and his face was missing. He was still wearing his clothes. He was a corpse, and his face was missing. I hadn't even done an anatomy class yet, so this turned out to be my first dead thing I ever saw. Mr. Brandt's corpse was staring right at me, his eyeballs in full view, wide open because he didn't have eyelids anymore. I wouldn't describe him as grinning, but his teeth were on full display, and the color was surreal. It was a deep red, the blood, the flesh, the muscles on his face, all this deep red. I didn't want to walk towards him. It nearly knocked me out. Just the sight of his bloody corpse caused me to throw up in my mouth. Bits of vomit was dribbling from my lips. Started to get lightheaded. Who would I even tell first? How did this happen? Creak, creak. It took me a few moments to figure out what the noise was. It was the creaking of the stairs. Somebody was coming up the stairs. Somebody was in the house with me. Somebody was going to take my face off like Mr. Brandt. I didn't want to die, and I definitely didn't want my face taken off. I looked around me and panicked. My breathing was getting heavier, and I was sweating, just sweating. With the creaks, the stench, the bloody face, I couldn't think straight. Creak, creak, creak. They were starting to get faster and faster. Whoever it was, they were closing in. I kept panicking and going from one side of the room to the other. I was going to die here, I thought. Then I looked at the body of Mr. Brandt for one last time, sitting at his desk, in front of the window. The window. They're probably thinking I'm an idiot for not thinking of it earlier, but I was panicking too much to think straight. I basically ran to the window, but I was so terrified it made the window latch seem like a Rubik's Cube. Then I heard the creaking stop. Whoever it was had reached the hallway and was walking right towards this room. Through sheer adrenaline, I just straight up broke the latch and forced the window open. I would like to say I jumped through the window, but I pretty much just crawled through it, banging my head, knees, and elbows on the windowsill. The fear pounding my head then made me the most uncoordinated thing on the planet. That only got worse when I tumbled down and landed on the bushes by the side of the house. I don't know how, but I didn't feel hurt, so I bolted straight back to my house, locked the doors, shut the windows, grabbed my Mossberg, called the police, and sat in the corner of the bathroom, aiming my rifle at the doorway in case anybody tried to enter. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. It nearly turned into a crisis situation when I greeted them still holding my Mossberg, but they could see I was scared to death. And nothing happened, thankfully. They didn't find anybody in Mr. Brandt's house apart from Mr. Brandt. They said he was murdered, which was obvious, but they also said he had been dead for 3 days. When I heard that, I told them that I talked to him and saw him in the past 3 days, but they reassured me and my mom that the coroner was certain he'd been dead. I don't know what to believe. Either the coroner was wrong or I was talking and seeing someone whoever you are, you sick individual, there ain't no punishment cruel enough for what you've done. Don't get off until you hit the 9th floor. No exceptions. But my interview is on 5. I replied. I'll only say this only one more time. Don't get off until you hit 9. No other floor is safe. It's crazy, but something about the way he said it penetrated my skull. He was serious, and he looked nervous, like he had to fight every instinct in his body to say that to me. The doors closed, while I thought to myself, who the hell says anything like that? As I went to hit the button for the 5th floor, some anxiety came over me. I shook it off and pressed it. The guy was probably just off his rockers. The elevator went up. I scanned my surroundings. A TV bolted to the top corner of the elevator playing the weather channel, a mirror for the back wall of the elevator, and some cozy lounge-style music playing. Pretty standard stuff. Now arriving at the 5th floor. Weird, not sure if I'd ever been in an elevator that announced each floor it was arriving at. I was sure that if I worked in this building, this would get pretty old quickly. Ding, the doors opened on 5. In front of me was a reception area, with a woman seated at the front desk. She stood up from her seat. Mr. Davis, you're early. The gentleman's warning from earlier played in my head. We'll be ready for your interview in a few moments. In the meantime, please feel free to take a seat. Thank you, I responded. If I'm early, maybe I can come back in a few minutes. Nonsense. We'll see if we can speed things up. He's been very excited to meet you. The elevator doors started closing. I held them open. I wasn't sure what to do here, but everything seemed fine enough. Granted, the receptionist did seem a bit eager, but beyond that, from my vantage point, I scanned the office space behind the front desk area. All looked normal. Cubicles, folks clicking away at their computer, a kitchen area. Pretty unremarkable. That is, except for the portrait off at the far end of the office floor. It was very large. I couldn't tell what the picture was of, but I did see a group of employees staring at it, almost admiring it. Your wife's name is Meredith, right? I froze as the receptionist's question shot a dart right through me. I didn't remember the job application form ever asking for my wife's name. You two are thinking of having children, right? If it's a boy, you want to name him Sam. What the hell? Forget that. She was right on the money. This was something I'd never spoken about before to anyone, including my wife. Before I could answer, the office workers surrounding the large portrait started singing the happy birthday song loudly, in complete and perfect unison. Someone brought out a birthday cake and presented it to the portrait. A portrait that, after a bit of squinting, I realized was a very large version of my high school yearbook photo. I backed into the elevator and pressed the close door button. I panicked as it took its sweet time to register. Press, 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 come the hell on. After what felt like an eternity, the doors started closing. As they closed, I heard the receptionist. I'm so curious to know what your insides taste like. Michael, screw me. 9th floor. I needed to go to the 9th floor. I found the 9th floor button and pressed it. It felt like it didn't register my push, so I pressed the button again and again. Come on, come on, come on, 9th floor. I tried again and again, but nothing was happening. Screw it. I'll go back to the ground floor, I thought to myself. Back to the start. As I went to press the G button, I realized it was missing. Just that one singular button gone. Damn, I was getting claustrophobic. I took in deep breaths to prevent myself from having a full-blown episode. The elevator started moving up again. A panel above the elevator doors lit up with the following number, 11. Someone was calling the elevator. I started talking to myself to self-soothe. It's okay, someone will call the 9th floor soon. That's where I'll get off. As the elevator approached its new destination, I noticed that the background lounge music in the elevator had changed. It was now an instrumental arrangement of Happy Birthday. Not sure why this thing thought it was my birthday. I glanced at the weather report on the TV. At least it was going to be sunny all week. Silver linings. Now arriving at the 11th floor. Ding. The doors opened. I hung around the inside corner of the elevator beside the buttons. No need to have another nightmare-ish experience, right? An old woman stepped onto the elevator. Great, I'm sure this will be easy to explain to her. She smiled at me as the doors closed. With a lump in my throat, I asked, "What floor?" "Ground floor, please." "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, but that button is missing. Maybe we could wait until someone calls us to the 9th floor." "9th? No, I think I'll just go to the 2nd floor instead, then." She went to press the button. "Ma'am, I don't think it'd be safe to. I have plenty of friends on the 2nd floor. It'll be okay." And she pressed it. I didn't feel comfortable cornering an elderly stranger in a seemingly haunted elevator, but I tried again to convince her. I know this sounds weird, but I have it under good authority that the 2nd floor probably isn't safe. I'd strongly recommend not getting off until we reach 9. She smiled. "Dear, it'll be all right. You know, I like to take all opportunities that are given to me. It's a shame that you turned your opportunity down. I know the folks on 5 are very disappointed." I backed up into the corner of the elevator. I saw the reflection of the old lady in the elevator's back mirror. She looked ghastly, otherworldly. Now arriving at the 2nd floor, the doors opened. She smiled at me again and then exited. I poked my head around the corner to look at the 2nd floor. It was damp. It looked old, more like a cave than an office. I heard a low rumble. A man dressed in a fancy suit approached the elevator doors and held them open before they could close. "You getting off here too, champ? I heard that 5 wanted you. I think we can give you a better offer." "I'm good." "You sure, bud? The salary is $800,000 every hour." "I'm good." "I'm kidding, bud. The salary is we remove your eyes, so you don't have to see him." The floor went pitch black. The low rumble got much louder and started reverberating in my ears. Suddenly, the businessman grabbed me by the collar and tried to pull me out of the elevator. I clung onto the ends of it. Damn, I started kicking and headbutting him. I was able to make him let go of me momentarily as I desperately pressed on the close doors button. Miraculously, the elevator responded much quicker this time, and they closed immediately. I tried the 9th floor button again. Didn't work. I pressed 8 instead. Anything to get away from this hellhole of a floor. I heard a loud banging on the door as the elevator started taking off, like an aggressive knock. Bang, 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 as I saw the floor numbers rising. 3, 4, 5. The banging continued, just as loud. What the hell? 6th floor, 7th floor. The banging on the door didn't subside. Now arriving at the 8th floor, I pressed the button for the 23rd floor. Just as we arrived on 8, I mashed the close doors button just as the elevator doors were about to open. The banging continued as the elevator doors started denting. The elevator continued going up. 9, 10, 11. The banging softened. 14, 15, and softened. 19, 20, 21, and disappeared. Now arriving at the 23rd floor, it was gone. Thank God. I exhaled. It felt like I'd narrowly avoided disaster. The doors opened. I scanned the new floor and I realized I was back on the ground floor. That's what it looked like anyways. Did I escape? Was I finally free? A man stood not too far from the door. He looked familiar, but I couldn't exactly place him. "Hey man," he spoke. Was this the guy who got off the elevator just as I got on? "Hey, it's over, man. You got out," he told me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I had to fight it. "But you said the 9th floor was the only safe one, right?" "That was a trick. You followed your gut, and you were right. 23rd floor, a real safe floor. You can step out now, man." I didn't leave. "There's someone here who really wants to see you." I couldn't move. "He wants to give you a job." He thinks you're gonna be great. Why the hell couldn't I move? He's in the other room. I'm gonna fetch him, okay? All you have to do is look at him. It'll feel a bit weird at first, but then it'll all be okay. It's a permanent position. Great benefits. It is fully on-site. But no better birthday present than a new job, right? I lowered my gaze to the floor. I forced myself to mutter the following words, "It's not my birthday," as he left to fetch. Whoever he was meaning to fetch, he gave me the following response: "Relax, man. No cursing on the job. We're a family here." It felt like I could only move a centimeter at a time, a true snail's pace. I inched my finger closer and closer to the closed door button. I heard footsteps. He was coming back. With every fiber of my being, I pushed through. I hit the button. The doors closed, and I collapsed to the floor, free from whatever weird force was stopping me from moving. "I'll let you two talk more on the elevator," I heard him say from outside the doors. What? Instinctively, I looked around. To my surprise, there was nothing. The elevator was the same as it had always been. A lengthy exhale. I was done with all of this. At this point, I would have taken death over continuing this BS any longer. As I pondered my next move in this hopeless situation, I noticed something strange. The button to the 9th floor was lit up, an ominous, crimson-red color. Before I could do anything else, my phone started ringing. I checked the call. It was my wife. I answered. "Babe, damn, I don't know why I didn't even think to call you. I'm trapped in an elevator, and messed up stuff is happening. And maybe I should call the cops. Damn hun, don't go to the 9th floor." "What? Wait, how do you even?" "It's a trick. Honey, you have to trust me. The man from before was lying to you. It's not safe. None of this has been safe. How do you even know everything that's happening? You just need to trust me." "Hun," I paused. "So what do you want me to do then?" A demon on the other side of the phone answered this time. "Go to your interview." I hung up the call, and in a panic, I mashed on the 9th floor button. The elevator started rising again. Even with me hanging up the call, the muffled sound of the demonic voice coming from my phone continued. "Go to your interview. Go to your interview. Go to your interview." I pulled out my phone and flung it to the ground as hard as I could. I stomped on it angrily. The warped sound of "go to your interview" slowly started dying out. But suddenly, the elevator started shaking. It was continuing to go up, but it was faster than usual. Really, really fast all of a sudden. Almost like the 9th floor was now way below me. It felt like an amusement park ride with no brakes on it. Loose, dangerous, flinging up at an insane speed, almost as if it was falling upwards. But I pressed 9. I screamed to myself, exasperated. It didn't matter. Now arriving at the 41st floor. God, what the hell? I was brought to my knees by the speed of the elevator traveling faster and faster. Now arriving at the 90th floor. The buttons didn't even go past 52. Now arriving at the 141st floor. Damn. Now arriving at the 230th floor. Now arriving at the 401st floor. I felt like I was inside a bullet. The pleasant voice of the elevator lady was getting deeper and deeper as we rose. Now arriving at the 840th floor. The voice started croaking, a demonic sound this time. Now arriving at somewhere nice. A sudden halt. The elevator stopped. The doors didn't open though. The panel above the elevator doors had no indication on what floor we were on. As I sat, I heard what could be best described as the sounds of hell coming from outside the elevator. Low grunts of pain, quackling, a dark hymn. Was this where I was supposed to get off? Before I could ponder the question further, I heard a soft tapping on the elevator. A voice from outside. "Do you want to trade?" said the voice. I decided to bite, for reasons I still don't fully understand. "What do you mean? What if you stay on this floor forever and I get to go home? I think I'm good, but I really want to go home." It almost sounded like the voice of a kid. "Hell, I am sorry, kid," I mustered back. "It's okay." An awkward silence between us. "He told me that he wants to wish you a happy birthday," said the kid. "I think he's got it wrong. Today isn't my birthday." "It is," he responded. "It's the first day of your new life. Your birthday. He wants you to look at the TV." "What?" I looked at the TV in the top corner of the elevator, hoping to see the one constant I'd had during this whole cursed trip, the weather. Instead, the TV was now showcasing what looked to be CCTV footage. Grainy footage from a camera of the exact elevator I was in. A live feed of this exact moment. Except, the TV showed me lying down, looking up with a wide smile on my face, and something above me on the ceiling, looking straight down at me. The lights in the elevator went off. The elevator plummeted downwards as I closed my eyes and screamed for dear life. I waited for the impact, for what I knew was my demise. Here it comes. I'm not ready. I'm not ready at all. Now arriving at the 9th floor. Ding. The doors opened. Wait, what? 9th floor. I peeked out from the elevator. Another reception desk. Wait, is this really the... I was interrupted by a voice from the outside. You coming out or what, you moron? I got to my feet. The feeling of distrust, anxiety, whatever you'd call it, my fear, intuition, it was gone. I felt light. Screw it. I stepped onto the floor and approached the counter. The receptionist handed me what looked like a button for the elevator. For the ground floor, she said. Single use only. I took it and headed towards the elevator. Then I turned back to face her. Can I maybe take the stairs? She shook her head. If you didn't like the elevator, then you're really not gonna like the stairs. Fair enough. I got into the elevator. I said a silent prayer to myself as I put the button where it belonged. It fit without any issue. I pressed it and the elevator went down. It was a smooth ride. Now arriving at the ground floor. Ding. As I got ready to exit, I realized that the ground floor button was missing once again. Strange. I didn't linger on it. I marched out, ready to get the hell out of this building. I noticed a woman running onto the elevator. I tried to stop her, but something in my body wouldn't let me. The most I could muster was putting my hand on the door to relay a message to her before the doors closed. Don't get off until you reach the 9th floor, no matter what. The woman just smiled at me. Happy birthday, Michael.